Voilà, bonjour à vous tous.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I've been told we can kick off. First of all, a huge thank you because we admire you for your for withstanding this heat. You're very resilient, very resistant, so thank you very, very much indeed for being here to listen to an excellent panel on a key question, which is not unrelated to the heat we're all suffering, because we've tried to take a look at how we can reach carbon neutrality. Of course, this is a key goal, but what will the pace be? All depends on our energy mix, our priorities, and our public policies. Also, the world is being turned upside down. We were being battered by geopolitics. Questions of sovereignty have become absolutely key. So all of these issues are what we're going to be talking about in the following hour. We've got a wonderful international panel. We have 3 people from the English-speaking world who are going to do us the honor of speaking in French, which is very valiant on their part. And I'd like to thank all 3 of them because we will be delighted to listen to them, to you, speaking our language. So I'm going to introduce to you our panel. We've got an industrialist with us, Claude, who is chairman of the boards of Orano, a major player in nuclear energy, one of the top 3 in the world. He's #1 in the world for nuclear transport, 17,000 employees, and 14,000 of those in France. Then we've got an insurance specialist with us, Denis, who is Chief Underwriting Officer at Zurich, France, a long-term player here, been around for 150 years, several specialities, working with companies and with private individuals in all over the world. It's a big affair. We've also got with us an investor, an American investor, YADIGAROGLU, who is the managing partner of Capricorn Investment Group. Capricorn is an investment platform, has been around for 25 years, working on low carbon technologies, which are working towards carbon neutrality. And that's very interesting because he is someone who really knows every fine detail about what is being done today in terms of engineering and deep tech. We've also got 2 representatives of think tanks with us, both prestigious affairs. Heather GRABBE, senior fellow at Bruegel, based in Brussels, a specialist for 20 years, I think, now. It's a think tank which is very well known for its knowledge on public policy, European policy, and knowing everything about European states, and produces very interesting reports. And we've also got with us, to my immediate right, Mario LOYOLA, who is a senior fellow in law, economics, and technology at Florida University. He's a professor of law and the environment and of administrative law. And he also works at the Heritage Foundation. Many of you know that. It's one of the biggest think tanks in America, which focuses on politics. It's a think tank which, if I'm not mistaken, played a key role in American policy in terms of its influence and the provision of ideas for the Republicans, the Conservative Party, and influenced Reagan and Trump during his first mandate. I'm now going to hand the floor to Katheline SCHUBERT. Katheline is an economics professor, and Katheline is going to present to us the economic framework for this subject, which is so thrilling to all of us, i.e. achieving carbon neutrality. Katheline, over to you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So in the world today, in the world of climate economists and academics, there are 2 young researchers in the United States who have published an absolute bomb of a document estimating the cost of lack of action if we do not do anything to work towards carbon neutrality. One of them is French. His name is Adrien Villal. He's a brilliant French chap. And their work has a very major characteristic, i.e. it's very solid in the terms of empiricals, which is very difficult to do because one cannot see the macroeconomic effects of what would happen if the temperature went up by 2, 3, or 4 degrees. We've never carried out any experiments on that. And so they have got a very solid methodology, and their results, well, no one's been able to contradict whatever they said, but they're saying for every degree of heating, we will lose 50% of world GDP. It is absolutely amazing. These are higher figures than anyone's ever given before. Of course, they've been criticised at all, but for the time being, no one has managed to detect any errors in the calculation. So this is an example. It's dizzying. What a dizzying figure. Yes, it is dizzying, but this transition is not optional. We really have to do it. Even if we wouldn't know what would happen over 4 degrees, we know that for the Paris Agreement, we still thought we were able to curb global warming thanks to appropriate economic policies by 2 or 2.5 degrees. But we're not even going to reach 1.5 degrees. In France, the temperature has already increased by over 1.5 degrees on average. And so it's all going much faster than we ever imagined it could. I don't want to make you lose every shred of hope, but things are rather worrying, particularly because for complex reasons we are currently witnessing what the newspapers are calling an ecological backlash, which has been initiated by what's going on in the States, obviously, but not only. And it's triggering an increase of what one might call climate relativity. This is a more politically correct version of saying that climate skepticism. It means that scientists are exaggerating. We will find solutions. People are exaggerating. There are other more important issues at stake. And so people are talking about it. Surveys are proving that. And policies are reflecting this feeling. And perhaps we may have been using the wrong tool in Europe also. We see that anti-regulation movement is increasing. And of course, when you decide to abandon tax or a pricing instrument, then you have to do your economic policy in a different way. So perhaps we've been barking up the wrong tree. So the climate is not favorable to transition. Transitioning towards low carbon is something which is occurring in a very uncertain world. In our world today, yes, there is tension. There are stress points which might suggest that the climate issue is secondary when you look at wars, geopolitics, which are, of course, more pressing concerns for people. There are some clear-cut issues which could strike people who are a bit skeptical about the climate. We can all say that extreme weather events are becoming more marked, more frequent, they're more serious. The insurance companies see that very, very clearly. We've got very clear figures from insurance companies. The big insurance players particularly are publishing this kind of these statistics, and it costs a lot of money. There are some places where you cannot get insurance anymore. It's kind of paradoxical. The highest amounts are in the United States. The problems are already with us. The important thing for us to understand, well, there are three things. So where does this climate relativism come from? Is it because as economists we have been discouraging people? We've made them fall into despair, saying that, well, it's absolutely hopeless, there's nothing we can do. And is that part of the cause? Is it because there are other problems, the wars, etc., and geopolitical tensions that are detracting people's attention? What can we do? What are our solutions? The second key problem is what economic policies are going to be acceptable. In France, we've got this kind of psychological trauma due to those yellow vest demonstrations, talking about the carbon tax, etc. So the problem of economic policies, which ones are the right ones, which ones will the population accept, which ones will really bring the population on board so that they become favorable, and what are the right technologies. So I think I'm going to pause there and let the panel step in. The panel is going to shed light on these different issues. They're very different subjects, so we might have some quite varied and surprising answers. Well, it's going to be very interesting, of course, because we're going to take a deep dive into our subject from different angles. We're going to start with Claude, an industrialist. You, before you joined the board of Orano, Orano is the nuclear specialist. Although Brussels has been a bit hesitant, Orano has been, or rather, nuclear technology is deemed to be neutral and good for the ecological transition. So in your opinion, well, we've heard that there's a fresh boost for nuclear. What, in your opinion, is the role that nuclear technologies can play in the goal to reach carbon neutrality? Well, thank you very much for inviting me to talk about my fabulous industry. Of course, the nuclear industry is no longer taboo. We're allowed to talk about it now. I'm really thrilled to hear that many forums have been addressing the question of nuclear technologies. It's very visible even in the financial sphere. At the beginning of the year, the European Bank said that it was going to be investing billions of euro. And last week there was a memorandum of understanding signed by the World Bank and the general manager of the IEA. And so with renewable energies, nuclear is one pillar of the low-carbon energy mix. It has been recognized for the very first time during the COP28 event. And we can contribute to the ambition by providing nuclear fuel from the mine all the way through to recycling, and by controlling the entire cycle. I think this is kind of a unique opportunity in the Western world. We are the only players to be in mines, conversion, recycling, etc., through the whole life cycle. There are some Russians and the Chinese as well are doing it. So this unique expertise strengthens our energy sovereignty and means that we can rise to the growing demand for electricity without generating further emissions. Nuclear energy is very low carbon. Not everybody realizes this. I really do think that it's vital if we hope to work towards carbon neutrality. So Orano has committed to carbon neutrality as an industrialist. Well, yes, we have. Of course we have. The Americans might say you have to walk the talk. Charity starts at home, of course. So carbon neutrality is a team effort. You can't do it on your own. So we contribute in two manners. First of all, by actively supporting the development of nuclear energies. As you yourself have said, it is a low-carbon solution that is available constantly, and I think that's important to underline given the debate that we are having at the Parliament. And irrespective of the choice of the type of nuclear technology, we've talked about SMR, EMRs, etc., there is one key element which is present in every case when we're talking about the big reactors or the small ones, which are currently being designed. You need fuel. That is absolutely key. And once that fuel has been used up, you have to manage it. So on the one hand, we are contributing because we are a key player in this industry, but also we are reducing our own carbon impact. Because Orano has adopted a climate strategy for 2030 with 2 chapters. The first chapter is to reduce our emissions. That's how the group has managed its emissions by 40% in scopes 1 and 2 between 2019 and 2024. And there's also a chapter devoted to adapting to climate change. And this is not just saying generalities. This is very precise. And financial efforts will ensue linked to this adaptation, and they are all included in our strategic plan. And our financial calculations, which the Board of Directors has just approved at the most recent board meeting, and it's 250 million euros over the next 10 years. This is the very first time that the group has done such an assessment, and I'm sure that the figures will be going up in the future. I can illustrate this. I don't want to take up too much of the time, but that I could say that the Board of Directors at the beginning of the year has focused on climate change, in working on reduction and working on benchmarks with other industrial groups such as the Michelin group. So even in a rather stressful geopolitical situation, Orano continues to lever its assets and focus on the core activities of its industry. Sitting next to you, we've got Denis STASINSKI. We see that the industrialists have taken on board this risk management, which is what it is. So as an insurance executive, this is your field. You need to assess, manage risks. We can see that the risks have become quite tangible, and they're with us right now, not in the future, as Katheline was saying in her introduction. So when we were talking about carbon neutrality, are we on course? What do you see in the companies that you work with? Well, thank you very much for this question. I'm going to try and answer with facts. The Zurich group has commitments for carbon neutrality. In scopes 1 and 2, we have committed to be neutral by 2030, and scope 3 to respect the Paris Agreement until 2050. So you're talking about all of your suppliers there. There's a lot of work to be done because yes, we depend upon our clients. Once that is said, we have two points of interest for carbon neutrality. We will be able to protect the assets we have invested in, because as an insurance company, we invest heavily in the market. And the second point, as we underlined earlier on, we want to make sure that risks continue to be insurable. So I remember having listened to someone, it was a former boss of AXA, saying that if the world is 4 degrees hotter, we will no longer be able to insure it. That was just to make a striking statement there. It was so people would sit up and listen. What we note is that there are some zones that if you look toward 2050 or beyond, those zones, it will be difficult to insure them. And if you don't go very much beyond 2050, well, just a few months ago, thanks to the Barnier Fund, some houses were bought up in Brittany to be destroyed because they will not be able to withstand the erosion of the coast. There are other examples, but I don't want to take up too much time with my examples. This is something, sadly, which is absolutely every day. If you take a look at the larger picture all around the world, we see that climate risks around the globe. In 2024, just to give you some figures, we had about 320 billion in damages, in economic damage. That was 0.3% of GDP. And in insurance terms, what is insured by those 320 billion, we're about 140 billion, which is insured. And in terms of looking forward, the trend is an increase of 5 to 7% per year. And if we take 7%, that means that it will have doubled by 10 years. When we're just advancing at a normal pace without straying from the linear calculation which I've used. And in the press, people say we've got one chance in 10, in 2025, 26 or 27, to have over 300 billion damages insured. So that comes back to what we were saying earlier on and the impact on GDP. So what is the advantage of an insurance company? Well, we have models at our disposal. We can model risks, climate events, not only statically, but we also can model them in a dynamic manner, anticipating to the future for 2030, 40 and beyond, using different scenarios dreamed up by the IPCC all the way through the decades. Let me give you an example here. We have just released a survey on resilience of energy infrastructures in Europe. This is a public report, anyone can read it, with a 2-degree increase. So we were, I might say, kind of generous with this. And reading this report, you will discover that we invest a lot in renewable energies, and you realize that with a 2-degree increase, we've got 50% of our renewable energy in Europe will be at risk of hailstones, will be at risk of storms, and the final example is a storm in December 2024. There was a whole field of solar panels which was destroyed because of that storm. And so after that, there are solutions which exist. There are adaptation solutions, and as an insurance company, we have a whole toolkit of solutions to help our clients to adapt as the world is evolving. So insurance companies do have clients. They have these companies that they insure. And we're going to ask Ian now, with your experience as an investor, you've got 25 years of experience and your keen eye on technologies. You reminded me that you have invested in Tesla, SpaceX, there's a whole range of different things. So in your eyes, what are the most mature technologies to reach carbon neutrality? If you were to select a perfect mix of technologies, what would you put in your bag? Well, I'm going to give a couple of examples. Yes, it's true. Over the past 25 years, I've been fortunate enough to experience some amazing things. You've talked about Tesla. When we invested in Tesla, the first prototype, we had a battery which would cost, which had $1,000 per kilowatt hour. Now we are much more efficient now, much more efficient, and now it's less than $50 per kilowatt hour. So you can see the progress that has been made. Same, I invested over 20 years ago in solar cells, and there we were competing with $2 per watt panels or $5 per watt. Now I'm buying a much more efficient piece of equipment for about 9 centimes per watt. So we started early on, and the evolution has gone at a pace of 100-fold in terms of prices going down and performance levels going up. May I just butt in here? This is really important, what you've just said. So today, the cost battle, well, the ENRs have won that, have they not? I see Claude saying no. So we've got a debate brewing here. So yes, but this cannot continue. The amazing thing in my business, and I experience it every day. So we've got all of these different anecdotes that are really thrilling, and the future is going to be so exciting as it was 20 years ago. So I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. In the solar industry, the panels have become so cheap that now we have to focus on everything that goes with the panel. I've got a company which we have founded. We've got panels which are behind tractors on a trailer. And we put those panels, they're delivered straight from the trailer onto the ground, and we can do that at top speed, at lightning speed. There's no comparison with the traditional method, and it's creating, of course, new challenges, but we will be able to solve those with robotics, for example. But we can bring down overnight by 30% the cost of a solar installation compared with what we would do the previous year. 15 years ago, we invented our tracker. So most of what we're doing today in the States, most of the things we're doing in Europe are on pillars or piles which follow the sun. We can do that for 30% cheaper, going even faster with an even easier supply chain. So I'm going to give you another example of the battery with Jarvis Travel, the inventor of Tesla. We created what has become the #1 in the States in recycling batteries, redwood materials. 10 or so days ago, we launched Redwood Energy because we are the #1 in recycling batteries. We get so many gigawatts which come to us from lorries and cars. Even if it's a small market for the moment, it's already generating high volume. So what has happened? Well, we've got these packs which came from cars and trucks. They weren't efficient enough for road use, but still have energy in them and can be used to store energy. And so the company has got the cheapest electrons from solar. We've got the batteries, which are the cheapest in the world because we didn't even have to buy them. They've already been used out on the road, and they were going to be recycled 2 or 3 years later. And they work with Crusoe, the #1 or one of the top companies in the construction of data centers for artificial intelligence. So they've grouped all of these 3 things together so that they can directly create solar, storage, and AI in one spot in Nevada without having to use either gas or nuclear energy or anything else. So that is another very important point. I think Mario would like to talk about that as well. The weak spot here is is a storage, if you like. But now you're saying there are technologies today, without going into the details, that are being enhanced and mean that today, even with the AI, you can manage the weak spot, i.e. intermittency and storage. Is that right? Yeah, there is no doubt whatsoever. Yeah, the details are, of course, important. Here we're talking about Nevada. There's loads of sunshine there, 365 days a year. It so happens that some of the AI data centers are not too sensitive to the fact that from time to time there may be a little less electricity produced because they can modulate how much electricity they consume. So if you want something which is 100%, it would cost a bit more to do it that way. But if you need your data center to be able to work 80% or 90% of the time, not 100%, then this is the cheapest option. And that's the US. In China, the prices are even lower. Just to proceed with another example, we are currently relaunching geothermal electricity, which plays a tiny role today. Nobody likes it because it's failed many times. There are very few projects, and the geography is never really adequate. It's not where you want to put your factories. It's not where there's consumption. It's not really an area where there's a great deal of interest. However, a couple of youngsters came to see me some 5 years ago, and they said, it's really weird. We haven't applied the latest oil industry technologies to geothermal industry, horizontal drilling and stone fracking. And very soon we realized that by marrying these 2 technologies together, we could go into areas which were much rare and go into areas where there were just granite, for example, and very, very quickly we could drill down very, very deeply and drill horizontally and create our own heat stores by doing fracking between our wells. And so this technology is much more reliable, less risk, much cheaper. And with the first tests in Nevada, we have created the most powerful geothermal well at costs that were beyond our dreams. We never thought we'd be able to do it as cheaply. And now we think we've got great visibility about the fact that in the next 5-10 years to come, in the 5 years to come, we'll be doing 10 gigawatts, and in 10 years we can do tens of gigawatts in the US from these autonomous wells. And this is energy which is available all year round, and it's completely stable. So there's no impact, there's no damage to the environment. Unlike fracking in the oil industry, where there is a problem of pollution, here, because we're talking about water, heat, and granite, there is no problem with pollution.
Is there a visual impact when you build an electricity plant? There's a visual impact. You have turbines working. If you have a natural park, this is not a place to build it, but there's no problem as to pollution as what you would have with the oil fracking. We have something in common with the oil fracking, is that we have to pay attention to the seismic aspect. You can't do that close to seismic places,
En danger?
to seismic faults. So, as for all technologies in the world, we have to pay attention to what we do. We have to do it well. It's a door opening again with progress coming directly from oil industry, and that's the only technology, I have to say, because I live in the US, I work in the US, I'm amidst all this all these unbearable politics, but this is something that is advocated both by Democrats and Republicans. And our greatest fan, it actually brings consensus, yes, indeed. And actually, for geothermal wells, it said that it had a huge potential in the high-tech world. So we're reaching you now on another way to reach carbon-free energy. States, the EU, public policies deal with that. But whilst prepping this discussion, you said, careful, there's not only carbon. Carbon-free is good, but maybe, well, actually, you had rediscussed the topic of the panel, saying we should integrate other elements because everything is embedded and intrinsically related. It is not only a matter of carbon-free. Yes, the objective of carbon neutrality, please, it is really important to have this objective because we need to have an objective and a benchmark to measure progress and to anticipate globally if we're going backwards or forward. So I am not challenging the objective per se, but it's one of many others. If we look at the laws of physics, of chemistry, and if we look at the most recent research of the UN, we can see that even if we could be over with CO2 emissions right now, we would still have a lot of problems relating to water pollution in oceans because of plastic pollution and so on and so forth that threaten our economy but also our health. So we have to understand that there's more to carbon to protect the environment. There are those externalities, this is what we mentioned, that are not taken into consideration in the system. Our PB measures, also our productivity measures and so on. So we have to assess and have a more global approach. Also because the impact of climate on nature prevents us from continuing a lot of economic activities. For instance, nuclear energy needs water coming from rivers, and that is at low temperature. For France, we cannot reach the highest potential in nuclear energy because it's too hot, and the levels of water are too low. In 2002, we had problems because we couldn't reach that potential and harness it. This is an example. Also, food production, water security, and so on. So I would rather talk about climatic neutrality as a whole. Now, when it comes to economic policy of transition, we have a high risk, we incur a high risk of going backwards when we have to gain momentum, because we are going to lose investments. We already see this year, after the inauguration of the Trump coming up, that we have a lot of losses of investments in energy, and they have fallen out. And I come from the round table on the Draghi report. I think everybody was there. And Draghi said, now, in Europe, most of the subsidies benefit the existing industry, not the startups, not the innovators, not the new technologies that could produce the solutions that we need. And this is a problem, because what happens is we're slowing down when it comes to transition. We continue to subsidize existing industry that makes it difficult to reduce the CO2 emissions, and that will be a hurdle for transition and make it more costly. And like what was said earlier during that session, that we have assessed the cost of transition, but not that much the cost of inaction and losing the investments that is necessary for this sector. And this is why another important point of the Draghi report, we're very proud here in Europe, because we have a framework with regulations, and it is trustworthy. It is reliable. We can give certainties to our companies, to our investors. It's not like in other countries where there's a lot of uncertainties. But we can see that now, with the uncertainties relating to the EU objectives, rather not the EU objectives, but policies and how to implement them, we're losing investments already. So the cost of transition will be higher, and this is imposed by climate. Right now, in Europe, the idea is that there's an option to maintain the situation as is. We could just slow down, and it's okay, we would manage in 5 years. But it's not the case, because climate change is here, is now. And there's a lot of questions. And we are at the beginning of this debate. First, what about insurance? Will there be regions in Europe and sectors in Europe where it will be impossible for insurance companies to operate? This will have a significant impact on credit markets. You can't get a loan without an insurance. We saw it already in the US, where there are insurance companies that have set back in Florida or in other regions because the risk is too high. So we have a lot of challenges that are looming and that we start to grasp, and we have to find solutions that are common to all of us. So we shouldn't push back. We shouldn't slow down. And right now, I see, if we look at survey polls, the public is much more ahead of the political class. 80% wants more action when it comes to climate change. There's a huge support from the population. And this is amongst all the socioeconomic classes. It's not a matter of being poor or rich, anyone. And also, and especially, the young generation, which is very concerned about climate change. But the political decision makers do not want to change enough and fast enough, and do not want to give an impetus to fighting against climate change and raising enough funds for investments that will be necessary. Thank you, Heather. Mario, Heather just said that we needed a momentum, an impetus to invest, to maintain our course, to reach that objective of carbon neutrality. But you have a stance which is quite provocative, but this is your opinion. You think that today the objective of carbon neutrality, the development of renewable energies, will actually face the terrible truth of reality. So why carbon neutrality and renewable energies could go into headwinds. Well, I share the optimism of my colleague in somewhat. I would like to share some words of skepticism as well. My biggest intellectual enemy in all fields of life is the person that doesn't want to talk about the probable consequences of inaction. On my right-hand side, on my left-hand side in the panel, but in my political life, we see that type of people. And those that speak with principles, well, first, climate change as an existential crisis is often that type of person. Why? Because when you talk about climate change as an existential crisis, any solution is justified, whatever the type of human suffering that could be the outcome thereof. So it's a matter of cost-benefit ratio analysis. Maybe you're not interested in the cost-benefit ratio, but it is interested in you. I didn't think that you would quote Trotsky, but it didn't seem to be your first reference, but there it is. Anyway, if you are a political decision maker and you don't make this cost-benefit analysis, you will lose the next elections, and this is what happened with President Biden. And even President Biden, who believed religiously in fighting against climate change when he saw the yellow jackets in France, he had the intention to increase taxation on oil, and he saw the yellow jackets and he said, no way. No, thank you. So now Democrats in the US start getting committed and engaged on climate change policies, but to the unbeknownst of the population, they want to do that in hiding. But this is not sustainable, because if it's not sustainable, then it will have an impact on human population that we do not want. So what we should avoid is energy poverty. So you mean energy precarity, those that do not have access to energy. And climate action that could be successful goes through energy abundance. So if we look at government policies in the framework of the Paris Agreement, what are these policies doing? In the majority of cases, my opinion, especially in the industrial world, these policies are reducing the supply of energy in a way that will increase price of energy, and that will entail poverty and precarity. Why? Well, let's look at the electricity sector. We are in an industrial world right now which is decommissioning fossil fuel services that we could roll out, where we could roll out renewable energy. In the US, there's a bad version of this problem, because with subsidies and the Reduction Act, they have poisoned the economy of investment for the other sources of energy that we need. And therefore, even if the electric grid generation resources seem to increase, they are actually going down. And the demand with AI will increase by 30% in the years to come. And this is a source of concern. For transportation, similarly, when you don't have as much offer of commodities such as oil, and you think it's elastic, you can reduce consumption somewhat, but then the cost will soar, and that will actually punish the public, punish the poor people. And this is to make exceptional profit for energy supplying companies. So I thank Stop Oil facing Exxon. Now, what about medications? If there's a medicine that is too expensive, you look for another medicine. Maybe I should turn tables on your argumentation. When you say that if we don't look at the consequences of one's policies, we're half blind. But today, without going too much into politics, if we look at the American politics, they do not take into consideration externalities or the consequences of their own policies. To reach carbon neutrality, there's a lot of detrimental impact. There will be a problem with demand, with the costs. But if you pursue drilling, if you carry on betting on fossil fuels, this will have an impact that will be catastrophic. And this doesn't seem to be taken into account by the American administration of today. I'm not going to dwell on Biden's administration choices. It's a solution that seemed quite smart from the European point of view at the time, but there are consequences with the American political choices of today. Over the last 15 years, who has reduced the most coal production? It is the US, not Europe. Well, the US have reduced. That's a good question. We should always challenge the moderator. I would say that the emissions have reduced since 2008, and much more under the first mandate of Trump than under Biden because of COVID, but not only. So indeed, it's going down in the US, but the overall European performance is not 10 times better, but much better than the performance of the US. No, over the last 15 years, the most important, I'm talking about the stock. As for carbon emissions, we reduced more in the US because we phased out from coal to and natural gas to electricity. And that's one example of the promise of high-tech and innovation in the markets. And something else that I would like to say. There's another obstacle that we haven't mentioned and addressed. That's the fast rolling out of renewable infrastructures. And that's because of the red tape to obtain permits and to assess the environmental impact of infrastructures. And with this system that we have in Europe, this is a problem that the European Commission tries to address. What we could do with the Trump administration the first time to improve the system, we tried to roll out faster renewable energies under the first Trump administration, and it went much faster than during the Biden administration mandate. Maybe you want to say a few words, because we're going to take a few questions from the room. If you have some questions, please prepare. We'll have 2 or 3 at once because time flies. Yes, I would like to say a few words. Yes, I'm very happy to say that dogma is always wrong. If we cannot discuss into details, it's always a mistake. So I'm 100% in agreement. We should discuss. This is called critical, having a critical mind. I would like to correct 2 imprecisions. The energy that we build more is solar panels, and China, since the beginning of this year, has built 200 gigawatts of solar panels. It's not subsidized in China. The manufacturing, the installation of solar panels is not subsidized. It is not subsidized in the most majority of the world. The only place where we subsidize renewable energy, it's in Europe and in the US. Why do we do it in the US? Because since the first Trump administration, there was a policy that was continued, followed up, and reinforced by the Biden administration, was the solar panels that were the most covered by tariffs. And this is why there's a subsidy to make sure that these are covered by tariffs, because they're worth 3 times more than anywhere else in the world, including in Europe. So why has been coal phased out and has been discontinued? Because of gas. So if we want to say, explain why we have lost, this is because of gas. Why has gas been attacked? Well, gas is more difficult to be. It is more difficult to be more competitive because of solar and windmills energy, and because we want to limit the construction of solar panels and windmills in the US. Is there a hand raised? So, yes, sir. We're going to give you a mic. Is there going to be another question behind? So go on. A short and punchy question, please. So, we're talking about new production modes of electricity, but not this idea of carbon neutrality, namely stopping to consume or to find carbon emission set-off systems. So I would like to have the opinion, your opinion, dear panelists, on that subject. Thank you. Claude IMAUVEN will answer. Well, maybe not my opinion as the president of Orano, but I spent most of my career in a large French group that is dealing with isolation. And the best energy is the one that we do not consume. And I think we should deploy, we should use our best endeavors to limit and curb energy consumption. I'm not saying that I'm against renewable energies. I'm very much adamantly in favor of renewable energies. Solar panels generating. Well, you said that the good mix is actually nuclear energy and renewable energy. That's the French mix, actually. But then it's also a matter of political choice. But we were talking about the cost of energy. I have a professor of economy who died recently and liked to make comparisons. What is the cost of railway for the last traveler, for between if the train is half empty, it's 0. But then it would be the cost of adding a wagon or manufacturing or building a new track, a new railway. So we have to integrate the production, the storage, and so on. But at the scale of a country, the cost of intermittence can be significant. It's not the same for a country like France, which has established networks. It's not the same for a country where everything needs to be built. Thank you. Catherine, I think that the time is flying. I'm going to say one word. I think that today, the US react as a fossil fuel producer. France is not the same, because if we get rid of fossil fuel, we would be more sovereign. So there's a strong and important difference between the two. I think it was very useful and very nice to have that type of discussion. You wanted to say a few words, Heather? Yes. Well, just 3 points on that subject. Right now, as we speak, the only technology that could be scaled up to store carbon, it's nature. So natural carbon sinks like forests. So there's a matter of flows and storage. So deforestation is indeed a huge challenge, not only for nature itself, but also for climate change. And we have to invest in new technologies to store carbon. But we couldn't imagine that this is going to happen ultimately and at the right scale in 5 years, where we're lagging behind. So we have to think about nature-based solutions in the short and mid-term. And the danger looming right now is distraction. Maybe we think there's going to be a lot of pressure from government to invest in technological solutions rather than in natural solutions. We need natural solutions, especially in the global south. So we need to see how we can protect the Amazonia forest as a solution, but also for water purposes. If forests of Africa, of Central Africa, are destroyed at the same pace as now, in 10 years, the nature will hardly generate enough water for everyone. And millions of people will be impacted, and their health too. And this will be bad for Europe as well. So there are different avenues to follow to reach carbon neutrality. We have to think about detrimental externalities, but there's an emergency. And we have to harness every possible means. Thank you, dear public, for being here with us today.